Hi everyone, and welcome to today's jobs.ac.uk Google Hangout. I seem to have lost all connectivity. Hi everyone, welcome to the jobs.ac.uk Hangout for today. And the topic that we're talking about with our panel is how to be a successful digital academic and boost your career. I'm the panel host, and my name is Mewburn. You might better know me as the Thesis Whisperer, which is the name of the blog I run for PhD students from my hometown in Canberra in Australia. You might notice it's dark. It's 11 p.m. here for me in Australia, but it's lunchtime for most of you, so I hope that you're enjoying your sandwiches as you watch. I'm the Director of Research Training at the Australian National University, and the ANU is the most research-intensive university in the country. So every third student that you see on campus is actually doing some postgraduate study. I really have my work, therefore, cut out for me, trying to look after everyone. I've been blogging now for about 5 years. My blog has about 40,000 followers, and I have about 20,000 followers on Twitter and Facebook. And I'm delighted to be asked to chair this panel today, even if it did mean I had to stay up quite late, because blogging is a passion of mine. And along the way, of course, social media has become the place where I do a lot of work with my students and with my friends and with collaborators. So I'm a real passionate advocate of social media as part of your career plan, but I realise that a lot of people are very confused by social media and how to leverage it best. When ANU was looking for a new director of research training, my digital presence was brought to their attention by some of the ANU PhD students themselves who were avid readers of the blog. So ANU gave me a call and the rest is history. But how do you make something like that happen? When I talk to people, often I hear them say, I'd like to blog, but I don't have enough time, or I should have a social media presence, but I really hate Facebook. And if you feel like this, you've come to the right place, because our panellists are here to help and talk through that confusion. There's so many questions already coming onto the question and answer panel. And so there's obviously a lot to talk about today. And I'm going to ask our panellists now to introduce themselves, and I'm only going to give them 30 seconds each. So first of all, I'll throw over to Andy. If you could let us know where you're from, Andy, and a little bit about yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Andy Tattersall. I'm an information specialist based at the School of Health and Related Research at the University of Sheffield. An information specialist is quite a weird and wonderful job that would mean if I wasn't working in a university I'd probably be checking your emails via GCHQ right now, but my kind of job is to kind of explore technologies, everything from social media to altmetrics, from infographics to videos and MOOCs, and I try and encourage academics and students to kind of correctly use these technologies with an eye to information overload and information literacy. So that's me really.
Okay, thanks Andy. Obviously got some real expertise there to share, especially talking to students. How about you, David? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Head of Technology Enhanced Learning at the University of the Arts London. I moved there from Oxford last year, and I oversee a lot of our e-learning platforms. And I spend a lot of my time sort of exploring and researching what motivates learners to engage with the web. So, you know, the fact that a few years ago the library was where you went for information, and now you've got the whole of the web, but also the fact that anybody can publish and kind of the effect that that's having on higher education, and perhaps, you know, the ways that we need to adapt to it or take advantage of it.
Thanks, David. And over to you, Jenny.
Hi, yes, I'm Jenny de la Salle. I'm the blog editor for Pyrus, but in a former life I was a librarian. I used to work at the University of Warwick supporting researchers, and I investigated a lot of kind of social media and other digital technologies that would be useful to researchers. And I'm now working freelance and working for Pyrus. And if people want to know what Pyrus is, we say it's like an internet dating website, but with less romance and with more research connections and networking.
All right, that sounds pretty nerdy, which is really what most researchers would like to approach dating, I'm sure. And Michael, we can't see you on video, at least here, but I'm hoping that I have you sound. Do you want to tell us about yourself? Okay, I don't have Michael at all in sound. We had some trouble in the green room getting Michael connected. Hopefully he'll jump in at some point today. So what I'm going to do for the first part of this Hangout is just throw one question at each panellist, and I'm going to, in the Australian style, give them 3 minutes to answer. You may or may not know that the 3-minute thesis is an Australian invention. We're quite attached to it. And we find that 3 minutes is usually enough time for someone to give you a succinct answer. So it's a challenge for our academics today. If you're watching live today, you can write a question on the panel on the right-hand side of the screen. And you'll only be able to ask a question this way if you are signed into G+. If you want to ask a question on Twitter, use the hashtag #JobsQ, and I can see it at the bottom of my screen there. If I sound too Australian or too much like an episode of Neighbours, please tell me on Twitter if I'm speaking too fast. If you see someone's got a similar question that you would like to answer, you can vote it up the list by clicking on it. And so we will get them at the top of the list with the most clicks next to them, which is a good way to avoid asking the same questions twice. Okay, so I'm going to start with my 3-minute challenge, and I'm going to start again with you, Andy. So my question to you, and I'm going to start my clock. I see you've got a real special interest in information overload and how it affects our lives. So do you think social media can make the problem of information overload better or worse? And do you have any recommendations for academics who are worried about how much time it might take to spend online to build a profile and to communicate? 3 minutes, go.
Okay. Well, I think social media is a very personal thing, and how much someone engages with it affects how much it's going to impact on their life. But a good thing for, I think, young early career researchers and anyone wanting to kind of step into using social media and technologies more, and they're worried about this problem of information overload and these intrusions into their working life, is to perhaps try and start with some good housekeeping, because I'm sure people actually feel overwhelmed already by the amount of emails and various kind of contacts they get on a personal and professional level. So what I would start by doing is having a look, first of all, by all the mailing lists that you're kind of subscribing to and how many notifications you're already getting, and try and offload a load of stuff already, because I think people all too often just delete, and they don't actually get to the root of the problem of the intrusions they're getting. So there's some great tools out there. One particularly good tool is something called Unroll Me, which will kind of sync up with your email account, and it will list all of the subscriptions you receive notifications from, and you can on batch just remove a load. So rather than adding some new ones to the pot and feeling even more overwhelmed, just have a look at where you are at the moment and get rid of some of those. And then also kind of look at the notifications you're getting, what you're getting on your tablet device, what you're getting on your smartphone, and try and figure out which ones do you really want to be prodded and poked about. So, you know, if you're using Twitter, do you want to get a phone or a tablet alert every time someone mentions you, or do you want to kind of go to it when you want? So think about switching off these notifications, because I think that's the problem, that people then start to feel even more overwhelmed, and then they just stop using it all. So, and that's not what we want people to do. So look at using aggregation tools such as TweetDeck for your Twitter, and using curation tools like Scoopit to curate information that's coming at you from all these different places, and create these little strands of academic interest, very much like a kind of a Pinterest board, but of blog articles and journal articles and videos and all kinds of things in different themes. And a good tool to use is If This Then That. If you search for IFTTT, that creates recipes. So if you do something here in social media, it will have an action over there. So you do something in Facebook, it will impact on Twitter. You do a tweet, and it will save it as a Google Doc and create all your tweets into one Google Doc. So it stops duplication, because one of my interests in information specialists is trying to simplify processes and trying to remove replication and duplication, because I think these all hinder people from trying to use technology. And another good thing to do is just try and kind of plan your day. Try and not be driven by these notifications. So don't have your mobile phone on when you don't need it. Remove those kind of things so you can do the traditional academic work, so you can sit and write in silence and try and plan your day ahead to achieve a few things, because you need to do this if you're going to use the technologies, because they can be very intrusive. So
yeah, so Andy, sorry, that was your 3 minutes. It goes fast, doesn't it?
It does.
I'm imagining some kind of real life TV show where someone comes in and helps you organise all these things, because you've named already quite a few tools. I know I use If This Then That. I also use Pocket. I use Buffer, and I use various other tools, Flipboard, to actually arrange and disaggregate my feeds, I suppose, so that they don't kind of come in my face all the time. I always think that social media is a bit like a hose pipe back to your face if you don't actually engage with these tools. But knowing which one's right for you, I think you've nailed it there, that it's very personal thing. So thank you for that, and I'm sure we'll come back to that because there's been some questions already on the question and answer panel on the right. If you're logged into G+, you can ask the questions. So thank you for that, Andy. Now, David, I was very excited to see you here on the Hangout because I've admired your work now for quite some time, so I just outed myself there as a fangirl. But could you talk to us just briefly about the concept of visitors and residents? I use this a lot with my students. I find it's very helpful. So what is the difference between a digital resident and a digital visitor, and how might you move from one to the other?
Yeah, okay. Well, this is an idea that originally was a partial reaction to Prensky's idea of digital immigrants and digital natives, which was kind of predicated on the idea that if you're a bit older, you'd never get the technology quite as well as the kids, which just didn't seem to be true. And the point about visitor and residence as an idea is it just helps us to think about how we engage online. So instead of necessarily getting caught up with, oh, there's this application that does this, or this app, or there's this way of doing this, and talking about functionality, we're actually talking about our motivation to engage. So it's a continuum of motivations to engage, if you like, so that it's not two people. And the quickest way to explain it is that at one end of that continuum, when you're engaging in visitor mode, you're kind of thinking as the web as almost like an untidy toolbox. So you work out what you want to achieve, and you go online and you pick the tool that you think is going to work for you. You use it, and then you put it back, close the lid, and come away again. So there's, this is what Andrew was talking about. Sometimes you actually have to sort of manage your time to give you the space to do that. And you don't leave a social trace. This is the point. At the resident end of the continuum, you're thinking about the web really more like a series of places or spaces, and you're living out part of your life, whether that's professional or personal, online. So that's where you're going to go online to express opinions, to get involved in chat, in discourse. It's likely to take place in social media. And that is certainly one of the territories that I think is really intriguing when we talk about a successful digital academic, is to what extent do we feel the need to be visible, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of that. So obviously the advantage is that you might end up with global visibility, the opportunity to form networks, to collaborate, etc., etc. The disadvantage is you might feel like you're working 24/7. Depending on how that goes. So that's the spectrum of the modes of engagement. I've developed with colleagues a sort of mapping format where people can actually sit down and sort of map their engagement online across that visitor-resident continuum, which people find quite a useful reflective process, because it's actually quite difficult. The problem is all of this is virtual, and all of us kind of hold a very loose map of the way that we engage online. It's actually quite useful to sit down and draw that out and see how other people are engaging as well. So that's what that is in a nutshell as an idea. It's just a very simple way of coming to an understanding of that very broad landscape of possibilities that we have, that go from Googling and reading a bit of Wikipedia all the way through to making a YouTube video, tweeting about it, blogging, and everything else.
Okay. Gee, you're very succinct. You had 20 seconds left, so in that 20 seconds, maybe I'll ask you. You could just singing. So there's already been a few concerns people have raised about privacy. So do you think that's the key issue, where people decide whether you talked about when you're a digital resident, you're leaving traces of yourself, and you're exposing yourself. So are some people, do you think, more comfortable with that, or is it something you can learn?
Well, it's interesting because when you're moving around in visitor mode, you're leaving traces. They're just not social traces. So you could, obviously your data's being trawled and sold all the time. So I don't think it's as simple as you're leaving traces in one mode and you're not in the other. I think privacy's a tricky area in that sense. Personally, I'm not very resident in my personal life. I don't post pictures of my kids and talk about my life, but I'm very resident in terms of my professional persona. So that's quite an easy way of managing that. I think that you have to look at it as a kind of deal that you're striking in terms of visibility and profile versus perhaps the amount that you're giving yourself to the web. And there are sort of performative aspects to it from that point of view. Really you have to decide how comfortable you are engaging with platforms like Twitter and Facebook, who are effectively their business model is effectively selling your identity in terms of the way that they make adverts, they target adverts and all of the rest of it. And I think most people come to the conclusion that they're comfortable making certain compromises because of the benefits to themselves. But it's worth considering. I think it's got more to do about what aspects of yourself you're selling and in what ways than it has to do with privacy in some senses.
Okay, that's great. Well, we'll pick that point up again later because I think there's a lot to be said about branding, and there's a lot of discomfort about that in academic circles, I've noticed. So, Jenny, I jumped on Pyrus, which is the social network that has been launched for researcher dating, but not actually dating of the platonic intellectual kind. And I was very impressed that it immediately suggested that I friend Megan McPherson, who's already my friend. So do you want to tell us something about this social network? What do you think the value is of this kind of site? And given that there's quite a few, so we've got academia.com, we've got LinkedIn, we've got ResearchGate, they seem to be mushrooming everywhere. Why Pyrus?
Yeah, Pyrus grew out of our work at the University of Warwick, really, and our connection with the researchers there. And I think it's slightly different than the other kinds of platforms, mainly because it's so light touch. You can create a profile on Pyrus in 5 minutes on your iPhone. So it's quite simple and easy to create a profile there. And it doesn't try to do anything else for you other than put you in touch with other academics, other researchers. So it's very simple, very light, and you can connect it to your profile somewhere else on LinkedIn or Academia or wherever you use. But whereas the other sites maybe look a little bit more at your publications, your past history, your achievements, a bit like an online CV, I think Pyrus is very much focused on kind of keywords that you would choose to describe your current and future direction of your research. So it's about your collaboration interests. And it's very much focused on the idea that researchers need to make connections across boundaries, across the disciplines, across nations, interdisciplinary and international connections. And particularly younger researchers don't already have those connections. And there's lots of people who value the opportunity to do that online. And I think the thing about Pyrus is it is part of the academic community. It grew up from the University of Warwick. It's a partner of jobs.ac.uk who are hosting this hangout. And it's very much a part of the research community. And obviously it's been growing since it started. It went live to the world in August last year, and we've been picking up a lot more members and a lot more interactions taking place now as a result of Pyrus, which I think is great.
It's interesting, Jenny, that you talk about international connections. Being from Australia, and you can see it's dark here, and we're connected now through the internet, so we have many tools at our disposal. Yeah. But I've often thought, back in the old days, international connections for us had to be made by literally flying to other places. So there's a cost issue here and an equity issue, do you think, with these tools? That's what I do say to students and to academics a lot, that this is just another tool to enable that. Yeah. But I'm imagining on Pyrus, so you get suggested that there's a friend. What's the next step?
Yeah, next step is you can send them a message, and then you can take it forward in your email. How you would normally carry on if you go to a conference and you meet somebody maybe, or you've found them on Twitter or whatever, you get in touch with each other and you carry on your conversation in the way that you feel is best for your work, for your networking, whatever you're doing. So it's not trying to force a particular model on people once they've made that connection, but you might discover people through Pyrus. It's not really, no. No,
Okay.
not trying to manage any of those interactions. But I should just point out, I'm actually based in Berlin here. So, yeah, international is my thing. And I do a lot of my work with people in the UK, obviously, because I speak English. But I also do some work with Humboldt University here in Berlin. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Michael, have we got you on sound now?
I really do hope so. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Fantastic.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Yeah.
Right. So Michael, well, maybe I'll get you to do both things. If you could briefly introduce yourself, and then I'll ask you the question. So tell us about yourself, Michael.
So I'm a researcher and lecturer at the University, at Anglia Ruskin University in the business school here, and my research is really looking into the economic impact of mega events. And my research has kind of led me down a path that's developed kind of institutional networks across government, across non-governmental organizations, and my previous experience working for the Research Council's funded organization called VTI led me to project manage a conference called the Digital Researcher over 2011 and 2012, which really kind of opened my eyes up to the types of institutional networks that you can develop as a result of kind of using social mediums. And that sort of thing has kind of continued onto my very own kind of PhD research, and has helped me develop these networks that have kind of allowed me to gain access to networks that are regularly kind of usually quite closed. So from a methodological point of view, social media has been kind of the crux of my entire research in terms of gaining access. Without it, I don't know whether I'd have been able to get the leverage and the platform to be able to research what I'm doing now.
You actually answered the question that I was going to ask you. So maybe I'll put a slightly different spin on it. Do you encounter people that look at what you're doing and say, I don't know how you do that? Well, I don't know how you manage to do that. If you were to tell a person, say, one thing that they could do that could leverage social media in their research, what would be your top tip?
Well, every research has a kind of a very close-knit group of stakeholders, and I guess it's about identifying those that you need to leverage to gain access to certain forms of data. That's absolutely crucial. So in terms of, and it's exactly like the model that I used to be taught when I was at my previous institution. When I go to a conference, you need to identify key stakeholders who you want to speak to, who have the value and knowledge that you require to push forward your research agenda. So it's about kind of identifying those networks within social mediums, and I think that's the powerful thing with social media. And that's the problem with social media. There's so many of them. There's so many networks that you have to look across them all, and you have to identify those particular groupings of people that you need to find. So one, get online, get yourself kind of familiar with these particular networks, and then find out the specific ways in which you need to develop those institutional networks. So, a lot of planning is involved, and then connecting with the right people. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does actually. I can relate to it because in my own PhD research I did anthropology, and so I found my anthropological methods very helpful in engaging in those networks, as you're saying, finding where the people live, finding what they're doing, just by watching, really, lurking, productive lurking. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the question and answer panel now here, and I can see there's a lot of really tasty questions, but I'm going to go for the one that's got 37 people wanting an answer to it, and that is at the top there, which digital tool or platform have you found most useful for your academic career and why? Now I'm going to get all of the panelists to say just one tool that they think is the best tool that they've got in their toolbox at the moment, and why it's good. So I might start with Jenny, just for a change. Jenny, what's the best one?
I love Evernote. A lot of researchers were raving about it. They told me about it, and as soon as I tried it out, it's crept more and more into becoming my most useful tool. So I use it when I find a web page. I immediately add it to my Evernote collection, or if there's an email that's got something really useful for my work in it, I forward it to my Evernote connection. And it basically means I don't have to have separate file structures everywhere for all my different files, because Evernote tags them all together.
So it's a personal database application that's not platform dependent. So you can have it on your phone and on your iPad and on your computer. So once you put the piece of information in there, and it's free as well.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's free.
What's not to love?
You get more if you pay more. But I get enough out of the free version, I have to say. So, and I love tagging things because my librarian background, and find it very useful when I want to write a blog post on something new, that I go and look at my Evernote collection. What have I found recently in that area?
Great. All right. Thanks, Jenny. So Evernote, big tick for Evernote. What about you, David? You're muted, David.
I'm unmuting. I'm now unmuted. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was Twitter, and the reason is, and that's one of these kind of visibility networky sort of tools. I'm an incredibly disorganized person, so no end of kind of productivity tools will help me. But what I enjoyed about Twitter was there was a time when I was perhaps the only person doing the kind of research that I was doing in my institution. So I felt like within my institution there wasn't really a natural network of people, and I went onto Twitter and found those people that were interested in the same things, and slowly became.
How did you find them, David?
Well,
a lot of people are.
I think the way that I started was that I'd follow people that I met face to face at conferences, and I think that that's a really effective way of doing it, because you don't need that. You only need a cluster of about 10 people, and then you follow the people, you know, and so it branches out. So there's a genuine network effect there, and I found that tied me in with people that were interested in similar things to me. So to begin with, this wasn't particularly organised. I didn't plan anything. I was just having chats that kind of entertained me about stuff that I was interested in. And over time, that sort of network grew and led to, you know, funded projects and led to particular lines of inquiry. But at its heart, the reason that it worked for me is because it connected me to people I otherwise wouldn't have been connected to in an extremely efficient manner. So you can keep that ticking over during the day, much better than email, and as you were mentioning, certainly much more efficient than going to face-to-face conferences.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So which client do you use to look at Twitter on your phone?
I use Twitter in a radical departure from trendiness. Yes. What I've found over the years actually is that the kind of originator of the software, their clients have got better. And I try not to do, I mean, coming back to what Andrew was saying, I try not to do anything too clever with the way that I manage my engagement with Twitter, which sort of helps keep it at minimum. So I'm not timing tweets or, you know, making lists or anything like that. I pretty much just accept that there's this massive flow of information, and if I'm interested, I'll go on and have a look and engage if there's something interesting there.
Yeah, I'm the opposite kind of Twitter user myself. I have TweetDeck, I schedule, I use Buffer, so I'm kind of, we're at the opposite ends of the spectrum.
I think you're like a professional social media user, which would explain why so many people follow your blog, if you see what I mean. But for me, I went through a period of doing that, and it made me feel sad, because it like it had kind of taken the joy out of it for me. So I backed off from that, stopped trying to chase down numbers and trying to organise things and trying to be strategic, and just thought, I'm just going to sort of be me, floating around in here, talking about things that I'm interested in. And I think that's, you know, it's worth saying that you know, depending on the kind of person you are and what you're trying to achieve, don't professionalise your engagement to the point at which you stop enjoying it, would be my advice in that sense. But Twitter certainly was a core thing for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. I actually just love twiddling the knobs and turning the dials, and so that for me is enjoying it. So
essentially, you're just geeking out there. Yeah.
I am just a geek.
That's a whole different area. Yeah.
Okay, how about you, Andy? Your one tool. And sorry, Twitter's off the menu, so you have to tell us something else.
Oh, I got Twitter lined up. Can I just briefly say something about Twitter?
Yeah, sure.
How Twitter really, I mean, Twitter did lots of great things. I agree with a lot of what David said about the fun aspect, and that it should be an enjoyable, because it's a learning tool as well as a communication tool. But one of the great things I found with Twitter was that because I was able to kind of snoop and follow all the trends, you know, I spotted kind of MOOCs sort of like about 3 years ago, and was able to kind of take this idea to my director of teaching, and we ran our own MOOCs at the University of Sheffield, you know, sort of like 2 years ago, and that's thanks to Twitter. And I've been rewarded at university level, becoming a Senate teaching member because of that. So proof in the pudding that social media can enhance your academic profile. So if I was going to pick Twitter, I'd pick Mendeley.
Oh yeah, tell us about Mendeley.
So Mendeley is it's part social media, it's part social network of researchers. I think there's in excess of 3 million researchers globally now. It's part kind of LinkedIn with the groups and the conversations. It's part massive database that's being organically curated by the users of academic references. And it's part reference manager database. And it's free. Well, there's paid for versions, but the free version is excellent for any researcher out there. And the great thing about it is that it kind of introduces you to resources and to discussions and papers that you don't necessarily pick up in conventional database searches. So we have a lot of international students in my department, and quite often they're wanting to research topics revolving around what may be conditions in their own country, especially in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. So quite often they'll search the traditional Western databases, may struggle to find papers, and then they'll maybe go and search Google Scholar or try and find some grey literature. Mendeley is bringing in data and papers from all over the place, and it's also an alternative metric. So the more people save a paper, potentially the more useful it is. Not always the case. It may just be a very, very bad piece of research, but it helps identify other kind of research that's out there, and it's got its own kind of hot topics kind of trend. And Mendeley are very keen about the analytics of these things. So they're very keen about how long someone has a paper open, how long they read it, what they do with it. So it helps perhaps researchers identify other areas of research, new themes, etc. that they may not have spotted. But the great thing is it is this social network, and it's a great way for researchers to put their publications up. You know, it's another repository. Quite often organizations build these repositories and they sit there and they think everyone's going to rush to it, but they don't tell anyone because they're not using social media and they're not using communication tools. This puts this where the community is active. So it is a fantastic tool. I've taught it to hundreds and hundreds of PhD and master students. We've never had a problem. They love it. It's kind of what Google Docs was to Microsoft Word. This is kind of reference management to what Reference Manager and EndNote was really. It's brought it into the 21st century.
Fantastic.
It's owned by Elsevier, but I don't think people
don't hold that against it. Yeah.
Don't hold that against it.
Okay, thank you for that. What about you, Michael? So you can't have Twitter, Mendeley, or Evernote. Go.
Do you know what? I probably wouldn't even have chosen any of those, purely because, you know, I'm kind of a bit of a fundamentally lazy researcher. And what I mean by that is that I don't like social media taking up too much of my time, because I got into a scenario where I really was spending too much time. So I would choose kind of the blog, and at the moment I'm using WordPress, and purely because it interlinks between all the different types of social mediums out there. And it means that you only really need to put your content in one place to get it disseminated across a range of networks. So for example, I write some kind of ideas about a paper that I'm about to write. When I post that blog, it instantly goes out to different networks, right? So we're looking at Twitter networks. Yeah, I've got my mum on Twitter, but I've also got other academics on Twitter, right? So Twitter is a kind of a real blur between kind of the personal and professional networks in my case. Depends on who you tend to follow and who follows you. But it also then goes to my LinkedIn, which is full of professors that I would never normally speak to me on a regular day. But with LinkedIn, I can connect with professors, key professors like Bent Flyberg, project management professor at Oxford University, who connects with me. I don't know why. I don't know why he connects with me, but he does. And all my ideas can be stored in that one place, which is the blog. It's a decent amount of space that I can articulate something. Well, depends on the thing that I'm trying to articulate, but I can articulate something in relatively enough depth to get the point across and to get feedback across all the networks. So the one key thing, and the things that I've been doing with working with the research councils and at Vitae and at the institution that I'm in now, is we just don't have enough time for embedding social media into our workload, right? And that's absolutely kind of fundamentally fine. Academics are busy. So how can you be lazy about it, where you can have a blog which then speaks to other different forms of communication that we'll be talking about today and that's already been discussed in a comprehensive way? So that's why I would probably choose a blog. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm a big fan of WordPress myself. I run Thesis Whisperer off WordPress, and it's fantastically easy to use. If I can use it, anybody can. So I'm last up. My favourite, now that Twitter's been taken, is Pocket. Now, one of the reasons that I've grown such a large Twitter audience, actually, is because I do something called curation. If you're interested in curation, have a look at @CatsPajamasNZ on Twitter, or Google Joyce Seitzinger, who's done a lot of work on social curation. The idea is that you treat your Twitter feed like a radio station. And so I tweet out 4 times a day, just useful links of whatever I'm reading. And we also run another Twitter feed called ANU_RSAT, which does the same thing but with much more of a focus on writing. So the whole aim of my Twitter channel and my LinkedIn channel, my Google Plus channel, and my Facebook page, they all run the same links, and I run it through Pocket. So what I do is I get up in the morning, I pick up my iPad, I eat my eggs at breakfast, and I do my reading. I've got all my blogs set up in Flipboard, all my magazines, all my other curated lists. I go through and I just find what I find interesting. And I find if I follow my nose, what I'm interested in, most people of my type of person is interested in it too. So most academics have some interest in what I'm reading. And there's a little button on Pocket. So in any other of my apps, so Zeit, Flipboard, Twitter, Facebook, all have a little button that I can press that sends it to Pocket. I got this from Jason Downs, who's also another person on Twitter worth following, @JasonDowns. Everything goes into Pocket, and I can then go into Pocket. So I've literally stuffed all my reading into my Pocket. So I don't read very much of each one. I just sort of read and scan it to see if it's interesting, stick it in Pocket. Later on, when I've got a little bit more time, say over lunch, I pull out my iPad again and I read Pocket. And Pocket strips out all the ads, and it gives me multiple opportunities for sharing. So I just click on a little button, and I can send what I've read in Pocket to all my networks, to LinkedIn, to Google Plus, to Facebook, you name it. And so people always say to me, how do you have so much time to be on Twitter? You must be sitting on there all day. Well, actually, it's breakfast and it's lunchtime, and that's it. I'm just sharing what I'm reading. So that's my favourite app. All right, I'm looking here at the Q&A, and I'm just trying to find one. And now there's a couple of questions that sort of relate to each other. One is talking about, do universities actually really care about digital presence or not? And the other one's talking about how to ensure your digital presence is positive rather than negative. And I think these two questions are quite related. They speak to putting things out there on the web, or being on Twitter, or making YouTube videos. They're creating a reputation. They're creating a kind of understanding of you as an academic. I know that I got my job at ANU through that activity. They would never have known I existed if I hadn't have been out there sharing my reading, blogging, or whatever. But I'm interested in what some of our panelists think of this territory between private and public, and trying to make their blogging activities positive and actually leveraging their careers. So perhaps I can go through one by one and ask you, just what do you think is the one thing that you've done online that's brought you the most positive attention? So that's give you a bit of thought. Who wants to take it first? Hands up who feels they can answer that straight off. I'm looking down here. Okay, David first. The other of you can keep thinking. What's the one thing that you think you've done that's been the most positive?
Okay, I'm going to come at this from a completely different angle because I suppose the one thing that I did that was positive was to come up with an idea and then talk about it online. So I think just coming off the back of your comment, Inga, the thing that I like doing online that I find the most positive is putting a half-baked idea out there and then having a discussion about it. And I think that that can suddenly kind of open up your approach to engaging online, because we're trained throughout school and university generally to work on something until it's finished, and then only show the world when we've finished it. Quite often you don't show the world, you just show your tutor. Whereas I think that the real interesting aspect of the way that online networks can work, and I'm talking about this kind of engaging with others, is the opportunity to be part of a flow of discourse, and the opportunity to kind of push knowledge forwards. So for me, that's the most positive aspect of it, and that's the thing that I enjoy the most, is the idea that I can put one of my notions out into the world, and with the help of others, develop it, evolve it, and see it travel. So I'm sort of less.
That's really at odds to how we're taught to think about our knowledge and our ideas. It's all about the citation. It's all about making the claim. It's all about sticking your name on something, making sure you were first, and not getting scooped. And of course, that anxiety is very, very present in PhD students. What's your response to that? Because what you're saying actually takes a lot of courage and goes against some cultural norms.
One of the things that helps, I think, is that I didn't do a PhD, so I wasn't trained in that way of thinking. So in that sense, I don't have an academic career, and yet here I find myself. So I consider myself to be somebody who's kind of traveling almost entirely by a different route, whereby I'm more interested in expressing ideas and, as I say, moving knowledge forwards in those online spaces and places. Now, what I'd say, coming back on your question, and I'm very confident about this, is that some people think, well, if you blog an idea, you're giving it away. My experience is if you blog an idea, you're actually claiming it for yourself. And I've never had any problem that I know of people stealing my ideas. Now, that is partly because my career path, if we're talking in that sense, is not tied to classic institutional structures. And so I don't have to worry about that quite so much. But I recommend to anybody out there, to start putting your ideas out into the world via the digital, because it's a place where you can actually develop those ideas. That principle of being in your own little sort of room and working up an idea until you completely own it and then putting it out there is, I think, just really not fun. And I don't think it's. Yeah, well, maybe. I just don't think that's part of what university should be about. I don't think that's our remit. So, I'll stop there.
No, it's a good answer, David. And yes, but there's some areas of the university where that argument finds it very hard to find traction. Anyway, I'll leave that one behind because obviously I have issues. But what about you, Andy? What's the most positive thing you think you've either made or done or put on the web that you think's got you the most positive interest?
Well, I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree with David, just to make a point that one of the issues I come across by dealing with researchers and PhD students and master's students is this fear of failure, and the fear of that they don't feel that they can say things that they are actually experts in. And I've kind of run workshops where I've kind of asked people to search for stuff on each other on the web to find out what's out there. These are people who are not using social media, finding interviews with themselves on such as even SoundCloud and things like that. And what I try and express to them is, if you're happy for someone from The Guardian to ring you up or someone to interview for some blog or some magazine and you'll speak there as the expert, why can't you take control of that message yourself and push it out there? And we don't see that because it is a fear of failure. It's a fear of, well, I'm not entirely sure whether I can say this. So I mean, what I try and do is try and kind of practice what I preach. So I try and pitch blog articles and try and get bits of evidence to show academics that there's another way. So a recent example was I wrote something for the LSE Impact blog, which is an excellent blog for anyone interested in this area to follow, the impact of social sciences. And I wrote a two-piece article on post-publication review, which is a big issue these days because, again, it falls into this area. What can I say publicly? Can I say this? Can I say that? Where we're seeing academics now commenting post-publication on other people's research. And we'd like to think it's all very measured and very balanced and it's a critical response. So I wrote about the various tools that are available and the implications to this, and I got an email a few weeks later from a journal editor, a professor from New Zealand, asking whether I would write something for a special issue on open access for his peer-reviewed journal. So there we see all flipped on its head. You know, I've written these informal pieces for a blog. I've pitched them. Someone from the other side of the world has contacted me, said I find these very interesting, and will you write me a journal article? So there's an invited journal article. That's great. First person I told was our director of research, who was impressed. You know, something for him, for a professor, not a big impact really. He will be invited to do things all the time. But for me or people of my like, that's quite a big step forward, I think, and it shows that the social media and these elements such as blogging can kind of get you in the back door. It gets you heard because if you're not engaging, if you're not having a conversation, then no one's hearing you and you don't exist in their eye line. And I think it's about bringing you into people's eye lines that you do know about a particular topic. And
it's really interesting that you're saying both of you, I mean, are talking about basically just extending what you would normally do as an academic into these online spaces in maybe tentative ways or unfinished ways. So yeah, it's challenging already that notion that somehow social media sits aside or separate to everything else you do as an academic. So thank you for that, Andy. How about you, Jenny? Sorry, yeah. Andy. Yeah. Go, Jenny.
I think my key thing is if you're going to blog, you need to be authentic and you need to be open. And I've got similar stories to what we've heard already of where a blog post where I've written something about what I'm interested in, what I'm investigating and how I'm investigating it has led to somebody tweeting at me saying, can we get in touch? Because he's also interested in the same areas. And then we've been co-authors on a paper. You know, I'm a librarian, I'm not really an academic, but I'm still an author on a paper because of my digital media presence. And similarly, I co-authored a chapter in a book. I went to the book launch and met some of the other authors from that book. And now we have one of the other authors and myself, we have a blog conversation going. So it's gone from the face-to-face and traditional route into digital, and then it's gone the other way for me as well. So if you're authentic and you're open and you maintain those connections that you make, and sometimes, you know, it can take a long time. So the author I met, the co-author from the book, that was over a year before we got back in touch, and we just sort of reflected on the things that we'd talked about when we met face to face, and yeah, being open and authentic and keeping in touch.
So Jenny, it's interesting, and speaking as a woman, I often get asked, you know, do you get trolled a lot? Because that's the discourse that we hear, especially through the conventional media, is that, oh, be careful of the internet, it's a big scary place, you're going to get trolled. Has that happened to you?
Never. Yeah. Maybe I'm inviting it now, but I mean, my experience has been overwhelmingly positive. So yeah, I can't share anything on that.
I've had my fair share of them. I've just learnt to strategically ignore them, but I think it's very helpful that my avatar isn't gendered, and I've been very careful to sort of keep my face out of most of my feeds. I think that's actually been helpful, because the bigger you get, the more opportunities that you have for people to troll you. And I suppose maybe I ask for it a little bit when I do posts like academic assholes in the circle of niceness. So I'll leave that where it sits. How about you, Mike? What's the one, you know, single most positive thing that you think you've done for your career with social media?
Yeah, well, my career's been relatively quite short in comparison with most on the panel, but really kind of just to reiterate, putting your work out there, putting the hook out and hoping that kind of a fishy will bite is obviously kind of the most important aspect of using social media, just getting your research out there, dissemination, right? That's probably the main thing. But I also want to kind of look at it from a very different route. So, and I want to use a kind of an anecdote from my research. So I mentioned earlier that social networks can be really useful for accessing closed communities and difficult to engage with kind of institutions like the government, non-governmental departments and stuff like that. For my research, I worked with 2 communities in East London that were part of my case study. I had a really good following around them, and they'll be hopefully following me now. And I needed to get access to the mayor's office. I sent them email after email, and I didn't get much of a response. However, when I tweeted them their institutional profile, this was then amplified by my network, the constituents that they were representing, and they amplified my message. So on one side, it's kind of almost like a really good political lobbying tool for getting people who would not normally speak to speak with you, and that's a really important, particularly when you're doing quite kind of politically and economically orientated subjects, and that can be quite contentious, like looking at the economic impacts of mega events, big kind of macro spectacles. It's sometimes very difficult to get people to speak to you. So that's kind of one thing, and that kind of then branches out to institutional importance of kind of the ref and research impact, and it's about connecting with your people, especially as social scientists. You need to connect with your people, get their views, get their backing, which can then, because I sit within the field of critical theory, which requires some modes of social action and emancipation for certain communities who are being affected by whatever I'm looking at. And through access with these governmental organizations, you can subtly influence policy and practice and get your research out there on a kind of an important leveraging platform like these institutions. So, for example, I'm working with the Federation of Small Business on a next part of my research survey. Without a social media presence and getting through a discussion and communicating with them via social media, that would have never happened. But now we're kind of co-branding a study together, which is huge. And we've got the government involved. We've got, the Confederation for British Industry involved. And without that access to those relatively quite closed communities, the research would never been able to invoke, one, such a wide dissemination of research, and two, push forward the kind of the social action and critical theory that's required for taking those types of kind of theoretical approaches. And it's underpinned by the fact that kind of places like Twitter, forums like Twitter, really give hard-faced institutions a public and personal persona. And I think that underpins it, in my perspective, my opinion.
Thank you, Michael. It's really really interesting thinking about political action, particularly because Twitter and other social media sites have been implicated in revolutions. So maybe it's viva the academic revolution. I'll add my last one to that. Apart from the fact that I credit Twitter with my current job, which is a great job and enabled me to move interstate and work in one of the best universities in the country, which is fantastic. The other really positive thing that has happened to me is I wrote a paper with Pat Thompson called Why Do Academics Blog? And it's become, I think at the moment, it's the third most read paper ever in studies in higher education, which is a fairly prestigious journal. And Pat and I have been both amused and amazed at the speed that it travelled up that ranking table. I think the one that's ahead of it at the moment has been, 7 years it's taken to get to that level, and we're just behind it, and it's only been out for 18 months. So I think that what social media can do is actually amplify your conventional research metrics, because marketing an academic paper is a little bit of a niche marketing prospect. There's only a certain number of people in the world that are going to be interested in what it is that you're saying, and I think everyone here has spoken about entering those communities, being part of those communities. Those communities are the audience and consumers of your work, as we know, and that then has this effect on those conventional counting metrics, because I know, for one, I can't make my blog count in any of our research impact systems here that we have in Australia. Maybe in the UK it would be different. So I think also that it raises an important equity question in my mind, which is people who aren't tweeting, who aren't blogging, are they at a disadvantage then in conventional publishing metrics? I'm going to give Andy 1 minute to respond to that because it's mostly your area before we go and he starts to summarise, because we've almost used up all our time, amazingly. Andy, conventional metrics, alt metrics.
At this stage, I think it's too early to say, because alt metrics have only really been around since 2012. Certainly, what alt metrics are kind of helping people do is identify what's going to be hot topics or what's going to be a good piece of research, or certainly a well-cited piece of research down the line. So I think for those not using it, they're not necessarily at a disadvantage in terms of metrics. I think it's just more of a disadvantage in terms of staying in touch with what's happening at the cusp of the areas that you're researching in. So that has that massive benefit of kind of keeping you at the forefront, which I think these days is, in a very overcrowded academic market, is worth an awful lot. I think the metrics will become more and more important as we go along, because the problem is we've not been really measuring everything that comes out of university. We've only been measuring journal articles, and there's an awful lot of other stuff to measure. So it may be more of interest to people with data sets and other things like blogs, etc., as we go on, that we'll start to find these things. I mean, one thing that altmetrics do, it does show you where the conversations are happening and perhaps where people are talking about you in the media and blogs. So you get to find out geographically what's happening with your research, and I think again that is something quite useful for researchers to know. I think secretly they all want to know this. They try and say they don't, but I think secretly inside they like to know where their research is being talked about. Is it popular in Canada? Is it popular in Australia? Has one of my peers said something about my research? So those kind of metrics are going to become more important, I think. But at the moment, still fairly early to know. I think fund holders are quite interested in these things, and publishers are, certainly more than researchers at the moment.
Right. Interesting. Thank you, Andy. We've only got 4 minutes left. We're going to have to be very, very quick. I would like to now ask just each one of the panelists, what's your key takeaway message from tonight? I'll start with you, Michael, and I'll give you 20 seconds. I think your microphone's off, Michael.
Sorry, can I have 20 seconds from now?
You can. Go.
Okay, make sure that you engage with your public, especially if you're a social scientist, because you've got to look towards where the trajectory of the research excellence framework's taking us. It's taking us to impact on society, impact on people. It's becoming more humanized. And we really need to, you need to think about how you convey that in the context of your own research and try and push your institution and your, your department, whatever research community you're within, to also adopt that kind of mindset. It's really, really fundamentally important, yeah.
Great, thanks, Michael. You, Jenny, one key takeaway.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to be using these kinds of digital media to both to consume what other people are doing, keep an eye on it, but also to keep in touch with them. So it's a two-way process. It's not just about what you put out, but it's also about what you're learning about other people through these kinds of media.
Because that's the social part of social media,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And how about you, David?
Yeah, I think, interesting ideas and opinions, they travel. So stop worrying about selling yourself and brand and metrics and all of those sort of things, and start seeing the web as a place where you can actually engage with people to push forward your ideas and do your actual work. Because if you remember, that's why you got into this game. So don't get too hung up on the metrics would be my advice.
Yeah, don't geek out like I do. I can't help it. If there's a number around, I want to know it. Okay, that's good advice, actually, because sucking the fun out of it is very easy. That might happen. Andy, last word from you.
Have a go at writing a blog piece. It's not as scary as you think it is. Just it's a good piece of reflective practice. It just allows you to kind of think about the stuff that you're doing, and just think about it in terms of if a journalist was asking you the questions. So they'd ask you, what is the research about? Why is the research happening? Who is it going to impact on? When is it out? Where is it available? Just put it into those simple little terms, and you'll be able to kind of transform an academic paper that probably makes sense to a small group of people to a large group of people, because especially when we have to talk about things like societal impact now and the ref, it's quite important that we perhaps think about how far our research can go and what it can do.
Okay, great. We've got 1 minute left. This is really like doing radio, except with their face on the screen. So thank you. I'd like to thank all our panellists tonight, Andy, David, Jenny and Michael. You can find more careers advice articles, free ebooks and resources on the jobs.ac.uk website, which even us Australians keep a close eye on, and in the careers advice section. There's lots of articles relevant to this topic, and if you're watching on Google Plus and YouTube, then some links will be posted below. Just to remind you that if you want to go over and back and listen to any of what we've talked about tonight, that this Hangout will be put up on YouTube very shortly. If you want to find it, have a look at the jobs.ac.uk website and their YouTube channel. And so on behalf of jobs.ac.uk, thank you and goodbye from Australia and from the UK. Good luck with your digital presence. Good night, everyone.